24,
Excellent.
and I have a 4-year-old.
Okay.
So
Why?
it's a nice gap. And just as I finished, I started again.
Okay,
So,
very good. So you definitely will be able to give us not only the professional perspective, but from a parenting perspective as well.
I hope so.
I'm excited to look at your PowerPoint, and as you know, I'll be interjecting and asking questions then.
Okay. Well,
right.
I guess the leading question was what is neuroscience?
Absolutely. When I first looked at that topic, I said, I need you please to break it down from, as a lay person, I need to understand what is it.
Okay, so that's actually what I do, and I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
So I have a PowerPoint here. Can you see my PowerPoint?
I can see it.
It has my Ruffin Neurolab background. Yes. And so what is neuroscience? Neuroscience is the study of the brain. And the brain does all types of things. And how I actually stumbled onto this is because I hurt my finger while I was in school. And I went to therapy, but after I went to therapy and my hand looked normal again, I still realized I couldn't bend the tip of my finger. And just this little tiny bit of finger not being able to bend opened up a door of questions for me. I wanted to know about the brain, and the brain does everything. It does so much that there's still things that are not understood about the brain. And I said, okay, this is a good profession to go into because I know that there will always be questions. And I had an avid, I come from a family of educators. And so I was always really ground in learning and education. So neuroscience is the study of the brain.
Excellent, excellent. And so one of the questions I know that I get from parents and have gotten from parents when putting this topic out is, why is that important for me as a parent to know that? Why can't I just leave it up to you professionals to just study the brain? Why is this topic so important for parents?
Well, education starts first at home. And even before the baby is born, the baby is learning because the baby is forming. I mean, even within the first couple of weeks, the brain has started forming. And certain things take place during development that help the child become who the child is. Remember, the brain does everything. It not only moves and helps you see and hear and smell and think, but it also dream and all of these things the brain does. And it's in the development of the brain that has the brain form how it's naturally supposed to form. There's certain signals and cues that happen during development. And so it's really important that understanding how people learn is just as important as learning itself. I try to tell my students that I can teach you these things, but it's really understanding how you learn what college is all about. You know, I can tell you what I did, and but a lot of things that I hear from students is I don't learn like that, or I don't do this, and they say these different things. But if you think about it, well, I've thought about it. When you're young and you learn and you're first developing, children have all of these questions. You get the why, what is this? And all of these questions, we naturally are curious. We naturally are inquisitive. And something happens during the transition from that to education. And I was really interested in what was happening so that I could better understand how I worked. And so that was me just trying to understand who I was.
So, and tell me if I'm jumping ahead of what you're doing and what you're going to present, but I know that some areas that we work in, and you know Hartford very well, really is besought with poverty. There's a lot of poverty. In some households, the maximum annual salary might be $13,000 per year. So associated with that poverty comes a lot of different things. I mean, you've heard about youth violence. We've had our share, more than our share so far this year. Right. We're talking about blighted property. We're talking about high incidence of crime and things like that. And all of those things from talking to people actually add to stress levels. Can you talk a little bit more about this? Because it's not just one incident, Dr. Ruffin, it's like lifelong stressors for individuals who are living in these conditions. And so here you have parents who are trying to raise children in these conditions. Can you talk to us a little bit about the dynamics of that whole scenario?
Okay, sure. Well, in my figure, not only am I showing the brain, but I'm showing a bunch of little questions.
Mhm.
And I mentioned before that the brain does all of these wonderful things and still unknown things that the brain does. But that's if the brain is able to do what it's supposed to do.
Mm,
Overlapped on the figure are questions.
okay.
Am I okay? What if this happened? I don't know. And all of these questions that really can eat away at somebody because they are lifelong questions. Am I okay? Or what am I supposed to be? Or am I doing the right thing? What is my purpose? And so you do have a certain level of stress that you exist under. Some people think that stress is positive, and it can be positive. That's called eustress. And
Okay.
that's a form of acute stress. So I know that I have some type of presentation. I'm going to wait to the last minute, and then I'll do it. And my procrastination will force me to, all of these different mind games that you play with yourself in order to get an expected job done. And
Okay,
so
let
it
me
can
just
be,
ask that question again. So what is positive stress called? Eustress?
yes, it's called eustress.
Eustress, okay. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
and it's more so associated with like adrenaline or epinephrine. It's a
Okay.
burst of like exhilarating.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
some people use that stressful situation as a way to drive them to do something that they would, without that situation, be a little bit less inclined to do.
Got it.
And so that's a form of acute stress.
Mm-hmm.
And other forms of acute stress are not positive. They aren't as impactful, as more chronic stress, but they do
Mm-hmm.
cause some type of changes. And so, as I mentioned before, when I was talking with some people, that an example of an acute stress would be like, I'm single, but I'm going to babysit my friend's kid. I don't usually babysit kids, but I'll be able to tolerate this kid for a couple of hours, but it's not my kid. Have you ever,
Mm-hmm.
like, what did they say? You could go back to your mother. This is not my kid. It's good to be an aunt, that type of thing.
Yes,
So
you can always give them back.
you can always give them back. Well, that's an example of acute stress, and it's the most
Okay.
common form. And it's related to recent or anticipated demands. And it can be thrilling, like I said, with eustress in small doses, but it causes some type of physical or psychological change that is short term.
Mm-hmm.
And it's treatable, it's manageable. Like, you can say no. I guess one of the good things that we have is the ability to say no, and that will help reduce some of the stress that people put themselves under. But some people like stress. And so instead of just babysitting one day, maybe they say, hey, I'll be a childcare. I'll open up a daycare. Now you're dealing with that stress every day. It's episodic acute stress. And that actually is a form of cycles. And it's different than that other stress that I mentioned before, because this person is usually irritable or anxious or over aroused, and they might have problems communicating what's going on. And that stressful environment, they don't really want to be in it. They avoid that stressful environment. And physical examples would be like they might have a headache or issues with their blood pressure. They might have hypertension or something like that. Sometimes it requires a professional intervention. And the person believes that that source of stress is external, but really it's them that put themselves in that situation.
So you're saying that for another person, that those external factors may not be stressful,
Right.
but maybe it's stressful to me because is that my makeup or is how I'm responding to those stressors?
It's more so perception.
Perception.
So if you are introduced to something and there is a positive reinforcement about it, then you're
Okay,
going to be drawn back to it. If you're introduced in this negative, like for example, a lot of people don't like math.
right.
Math is beautiful though, but I can raise my hand and say, I didn't like math. And I'm learning to love math because it's hard.
Uh-huh.
And if you're not challenged, then, I mean, you want your brain to grow. And so the reason that a lot of people aren't, you know, attracted to math is not, so some teachers do an excellent job teaching it, but it's more so, if I don't know, how am I going to feel? How am I going to be perceived? And do I have enough patience with myself to go through that process, knowing that it follows rules? So there's a way that you can do it, but am I patient enough with myself? And am I willing to go through the external energy that I might get if I know something and I can't express it? Or I don't know something and I'm scared to tell somebody that I'm having problems going through something or learning something, just because how people, you know, school, people don't realize, and I have to tell students a lot of this time, you're in school to learn. If you knew it already, you would not need to be here. And so some people have a problem with identifying questions and all this other stuff. And the stress is just a layer on top of that. I mentioned three types of stress. Yep. I mentioned acute stress. I mentioned a different type of acute stress. I mentioned episodic stress, but you also have chronic stress, and that addresses your problem. That's the type of stress that comes with a situation that you can't change. This is long-term stress. And so an example would be like poverty. I can't change it. Or family dysfunction, or even problems in your job or marriage. These are long-term things that I know I cannot change. And sometimes it leads to, you know, suicide or something like that. But what people generally do is readjust their whole psychological and physiology to adjust to that stress. So that's the new baseline.
All right, so let me stop there, because I know that you have some more information on the chronic stress, which I believe you talked about how toxic that is. Now I'm looking at the other diagram to the right, to my right, I guess might be to your left of the brain. So here you have the drawing of the brain, and you have the messages that we're asking ourselves. Now, what is this over to the right then?
So a brain is made of individual cells. There's two types of cells. There's neurons, which you see here.
Okay.
And the neuron is just like every other cell, except that it has a different architecture and it has the ability to be excitable.
Okay.
Or it's electrically excitable. This is how we convey messages in our brain about the external and internal environment. And this is how we drive motor commands. And so the purpose of this particular slide is to show that this is the gross view of the brain, and overlapping it are questions that students may have about their particular environment that prevent the brain, not necessarily prevent, but distract the brain from doing what it naturally can do. And these particular cells are what we're going to focus on. These are neurons, and this is what I study. So I'm just going to mention this slide because I kind of touched on it during development. As early as day 19, can you see on the left right here?
I can see that. Yep, day 19.
As early as day 19, the brain starts forming.
Okay.
And by the 28th day, the brain has broken into the different structures that it would eventually become. And so what are these structures? You're going to have this area right here, the cerebral hemisphere. This is the area that deals with learning. This will eventually become the area that does all of these higher powers. And then you have other areas that involve not only endocrine function, which cortisol, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, has to do with the stress response. That's the stress hormone. So these areas all differentiate by the 35th day.
That early.
That early. That 35th day of within the pregnancy.
Yes.
Right. So that means that if you don't know you're pregnant, but you are living a lifestyle that is not as healthy, it might be transferred because this baby is becoming formed from you. By the time the brain is done, now, when I was in school, you learn a lot of cool things about the brain. One of the cool things that I learned was that each part of the brain, here's a top view of the brain, and this is the front, this is the back. There's a strip here that has to do with movement. Yep. There's a strip here that has to do with sensing stuff. Okay. And so this strip is on both sides of the brain. This strip is on both sides of the brain. It's just showing, you know, half of the picture. But as you move from the lateral side of the brain to the midline, you go from different areas on your body. So the brain is actually representing different areas topographically. It's very organized when the brain forms. And when the brain forms, now here on the right, you're looking at what happens when somebody is learning. Okay. This part of the brain is now the back part. You're looking at some words, the back part of your brain becomes activated because that has to do with vision. Listening to the words. The side of your brain becomes activated because that has to do with hearing. When you speak these words, this part of the brain becomes active. And when you are thinking of words to generate, this part becomes active. And so as a teacher, I try to have my students use all of their senses. I say, you know, not only use your senses, but tie it to an emotion. Like the amygdala controls emotion. And like I said before, when you're introduced to something and it's adverse, you'll avoid it.
So let me just stop real quick and just ask this question from a parenting standpoint. So you are also an educator at the post-secondary level. What about a parent who they're not familiar with all the intricate details that you just explained about the brain? How can I, as that parent, ensure that they're using the various components, the various areas of their brain, as you just indicated? Are there simple things that they could do?
Oh yeah, simple things. So, for example, the process of learning touches on some of these things. It doesn't even matter the age of the child. If you are communicating with the child and the child is listening, then you're activating this top right area. Okay. If you are reading with the child, now you're having the child look at the book and you're reading to the child. You're now activating both of these areas at the top. And if you're having the child read to you, they're thinking about the word and then they're going to speak the word. So this is a conversation. And
generating the verbs is a conversation.
Yeah, and not only this, I would add other things, because this more so is, now that the information has gotten up into your brain, what is it doing up in there with certain areas? But information gets into your brain multiple ways. Like right now, you're using your eyes and you're using your ears, and you're probably sensing different things, and there's other sensors that you're not even aware of to make sure that your body is balanced and at homeostasis.
Okay, so Dr. Vernon, I think this is very, very critical. So parents, I hope you're grasping this. Something simple as sitting down with your child, allowing them to listen to you read, and correct me if I'm off track, allowing them then to read to you, and then conversing about what was just read. That's a very simple way of actually activating the various parts of the brain. Is that correct?
It's about communication.
Sounds like that.
Yep, that's perfect. It's about communication. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And there's I mean, depending on, like, here's a list of things that the brain does. Okay. And so math and problem solving and all of these other things, that's targeting these areas. You want your child to think. And there's a slide that I wanted to include, and I'm gonna include it, but I'm gonna pull it up separately, if that's okay. But it's basically talking about the pyramid of learning. It's Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And at the most basic level of learning, is remembering. And then above that is understanding. And then above that is actually applying what you're learning. Above that is analyzing the whole thing. Now you're becoming critical because now you're evaluating, which is the level above that. And at the top, you're creating. And so in education, a lot of students are happy with just remembering or memorizing or whatever it is. But we want the child to understand. We want the student to understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and then themselves create. So that's really what drew me to this profession of neuroscience, because I knew that I would be pioneering thoughts, and I knew that whatever information would be valuable to not only myself, but my community.
So you've piqued my interest on something. I see the frontal lobe right there, and that's where the center of problem solving and things of that nature, the critical thinking comes in. My question to you goes back to the whole subject of the chronic stress. Give me an idea of what impact someone living under chronic stress, the parent, the child, might have on the frontal lobe.
Okay, so somebody that is living under chronic stress, the body naturally is going to adapt. As I mentioned, a word, homeostasis, which is balance, or just being at a level similar to a temperature. You set at a certain level and you want to stay at that level. Get too high, you get too low, and things become an issue. And so if you're living under chronic stress, the body is going to change itself to adapt to that chronic stress. If it was acute, then that would mean changes in either chemicals being released or maybe a reconfiguration of the area that the communication is taking place at, certain proteins. But chronic stress changes your DNA. You now are producing new things to deal with that environment. And as you know, the DNA, you're passing it along to the next generation. And so that is an argument used a lot of times when people stop eating meat. They say, okay, this animal was living under stress and I'm going to inherit the stress of that animal. So stress at a molecular level can change how the body is and how the body works.
And you're saying that not only does it impact me as a parent, but I can actually pass this type of impact to the next generation. So we're probably looking at generational impact. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. So I would just, and this is just me, thinking out loud. I can imagine that the stress of slavery is still in the DNA of the people that were enslaved. I can believe that things that happen at a grand level are passed down generationally.
Okay, this thing is mind-boggling. It really is. This is such valuable information. I'm talking about the chronic stress actually changes who you are at the cellular level. And I'm just hoping, parents, that you're listening very keenly to this information, because as parents, we have the different stressors that Dr. Ruffin talked about, the eustress, episodic stress, but then the chronic stress, which is more toxic, and how it does have a severe impact at the cellular level. So Dr. Ruffin, just go on.
So what symptoms should you be looking for when people talk about stress? Well, they break it down into, and all of the things that I'm mentioning, I'm going to provide the references for.
Okay.
I don't speak, I use references. So they break it down into psychological signs. So psychological signs would be there's difficulty concentrating, or the person is worrying all the time, maybe some type of anxiety, trouble remembering. Like, I remember there was a time, and my brother still might be mad at me. My brother bought me some sneakers, and I was packing up the car to come home, and I was dealing with my son, and he was doing something, and there was just so much going on, I couldn't think. And when I packed up my car, I left my sneakers on the sidewalk. And when I came back, they were not there. This was Christmas, so somebody might have said, "Oh, God is blessing me."
Christmas gift.
But that's an example of stress. And so you have problems remembering things. Another thing, now you have emotional signs. Somebody's always angry, or they're irritated. They're very moody, or they're frustrated. Maybe there's things that they don't necessarily want to speak about, but they're trying to deal with it inside. And it can actually cause physical changes. Like I mentioned, hypertension. It could be high blood pressure. Changes in weight. This is a big one. Changes in weight take place. And also, you have frequent colds and infections, because that stress is now going to be doing something to your immunity. It's going to be impairing some of your reactive cells. And for women, there might be changes in your menstrual cycle. You know, I'm like, even the stress of an athlete can cause amenorrhea, which is when you actually stop having your menses. And then lastly would be behavioral signs. So now somebody's not really taking as good care of themselves, and they're letting themselves go, or they're not really having a good time when they really like doing this, but for some reason they're just not into it. Even libido might have an impact on your libido. And so what do some people do? Because this is eventually going to lead to disease. That they try to cope. They might use drugs, or they might use alcohol, or they might use some type of way to gambling. This might be a way, some shopping way to just have control over something. Like, I know a lot of people, and this is for me, if I know that I have to do something, I'm going to clean the dishes, because the dishes at the end of me cleaning them will be done, and I can control that. You know what I'm saying? And so
something simple as like identify something that within your realm of control that you could do.
Yeah. And so I've heard a lot of times women cut their hair, right? I'm going to cut my hair because I can control that, right? So there's a lot of things that take place. And as far as brain development, I guess the main takeaways are that this takes place early in the developing child. And the process of the developing child is so critical, because the brain does all of these different things. And naturally, we deal with stress, and this is how we deal with stress. So the brain will sense some type of stress, and this hormone will get released, and that will act on this area to release this hormone. And then cortisol, that's the hormone that is the stress hormone. This will go and prepare the body for that stressful situation. So what does that mean? The body's probably going to need some glucose. So if this cortisol prepares the body to make some glucose, and you're going to need that, because in a stressful situation, you might have to fight, you might have to run, which is flight, or you might be scared, which is fright. They call it fight, flight, or fright. And so the body is preparing for this, but too much exposure to this hormone. Naturally, this hormone wants to go back and say, you got as much as you need, shut off the cycle. It's a negative feedback thing that takes place. But stress will make more of this. And as I mentioned, some of those things may be evident in somebody's physical appearance. Now, all of a sudden, they've gained weight and they're sick all the time, and they're moody, and they're not really taking care of themselves. And, the brain, it's just so wonderful, which is actually why I went into this field. But
it's fascinating. I have a question here from a parent. So if a child up until this point seemed to be okay as far as being able to concentrate and remember things, but now over the last couple of months, they have difficulty concentrating and remembering things, is that an immediate red flag? What should the parent do as far as some kind of intervention?
All right, so you're going to forget things, because it's all in how the information is stored. Just like, I think of your brain as a room. And how clean is your room right now? Just ask yourself, right? Some people can easily go in their room and find exactly what they're looking for. Some people's room is a mess, but they still can go in their room and know what they're looking for. And so it's all about placement and being able to retrieve the information. And so it seems like that person, whoever this child is, may have a lot of input, may have a lot of distractions that are preventing them from focusing fully on the task at hand. And going back to those learning things, communication is key. I think if you establish a dialogue and allow the student to speak freely and express themselves without judgment, knowing that at the end of the conversation you are working towards a goal, then I think they'll be a lot more receptive to opening up. But I mean, everybody's going to run into roadblocks and everybody's going to have difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things my advisor told me was never underutilize your resources. So there's somebody that might know what you're trying to work through, and it's about you being able to communicate humbly, you know. And right now, everybody has Google.
Mm.
You can learn. And they have programs where the software reads it to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
So I could understand a student saying, hey, you know what? I'm always going to have Google and I'm always going to have my phone. So I don't really need to learn it right now. But as long as I have my phone, I'm okay.
Google
and that's going to impair you.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to impair you. Even now, they're taking away the books out of school and making it digital.
I know you have some other slides, but I want to go back to this one right here about the stress response system. I heard you say something about if too much cortisol is released, what might happen?
So all of these things associated with stress will take place.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll have psychological signs or psychological changes.
Okay.
You'll have emotional changes.
Okay. The
you'll have
behavioral.
Physical, you'll have behavioral and you'll have physical changes.
Okay.
And some of these things can be avoided. I think like those early or acute types of stresses, those are the ones that you can easily work through. Okay. But with these chronic type of stresses, you're going to be like, as we said, restructuring yourself, restructuring who you are. And so it's all about management. I think one of the most important things that you can do is have a good diet. If you're eating healthy, then you're giving the cell what it needs to do what it's supposed to do. And that cortisol is really trying to supplement the energy that you would be getting if you ate. And so there's natural signals that if you do eat and have, that energy is going to not only be used for your brain to drive your thinking, but it's also going to be used to suppress certain hormonal changes that may take place in your body. So good eating.
Okay, and so that's one of our takeaways. I wrote it down, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes toward the end, which I can't believe the time has gone by so quickly, to add some more takeaways. So why don't you go through the rest of your slides, and I have a couple questions as you go through.
Oh, I don't have many. I just have this one. That's it.
And what does this signify? What is this message here?
Well, if I had more time, I would have had my son there.
I was wondering if this was your son.
No, it's not my son. My son is, I have a picture of my son, but right now so I saw this picture and I said, okay, this to me looks like the brain is important and education is first, and put your child first, and all of the wonderful things. I even see some boxing gloves. I don't know. Like we need to fight for our brain and fight for education. And so I thought maybe this would be appropriate at the end of a talk about education to show that, the children really are the future, and we want to make sure that we invest in them by making sure their environment is conducive to learning. And also not just leaving it up to the parent, or not just leaving it up to the teacher, but reinforcing what the teacher's saying or being the teacher yourself. So
we had a series, one of our series dealt with learning during a pandemic, and we had some educators who happen to be parents on there. And one of the panelists talked about being intentional as far as partnering with your child's teacher. and not just leaving it up to the school,
Right.
the educational
Right.
system. And so that certainly reminded me of that, with education being number one. I'm going to be intentional as a parent to really stay on top of how my child is learning and progressing. I know, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that right there is really one of the missions that I have as an educator, because I recognize that there was a disparity between the different institutions when I returned back to my home institution. And I realized that the actual approach to education was different. I created a platform that is designed specifically to train students in STEM using my neuroscience background as the driving engine. And so let's see, these are the references, and I'm gonna close this, and I'm gonna share now the site. Okay. And I'm also going to talk about the opportunities in Hartford that exist. So,
because my grandson, he has a scientific mind already. So this is going to be good for me personally.
Yeah. So my website is called ruffenneurolab.com.
Okay. Okay.
And on the website, it gives a little background of what the lab does and the general research overview. How I'm more so using my study of the brain to teach people about academia and research, and also using my networking that I've done to put them in positions where they want to be closer to their careers. And so I've had a lot of students that I've trained, and I focus on outreach. These are the programs that, so here's the institution. I'm in the back, but there's really not a lot of representation. And even as I was working with all of these students, I was trying to do that. And when I returned to my institution, here's my daughter now.
Okay.
So she actually was the catalyst for bringing this type of training, to creating this type of training.
Excellent.
And in doing that, I was able to create the first neuroscience lab at my institution. And so now these students, this one right here, she is now in graduate school going to become a doctor. And so this resource is available for the public. If you have a student that is interested in STEM, I want to try to help them. But I deal with students that are serious about their career.
Okay.
This is a competitive program. And so at the high school and college level, and even graduate level, because there's some graduate students that I train, this exists. And at the elementary level, I'd like to mention that in Hartford, there's the Hartford Friendship Kids Camp.
I'm familiar with that. And so if they're interested in STEM, that could be a great way, you're telling me, that they can spend the summer.
Right, because the camp most camps focus on like education, or most focus on sports. We do have those components, but we more so focus on character. And it's this character that's going to help you become whatever type of professional you are, but the quality of that profession. Are you somebody that is honest? Are you somebody that cares about people? Do you give back to your community? Are you a good person? And these things start at the elementary level. And as the student matriculates and gets closer to college, parents pass off the baton, and I try to help them if it relates to neuroscience. And if they decide they want to become a medical doctor, my brother is a medical doctor. He just got an award for Teacher of the Year. So he's also in Hartford doing amazing things. And so we just want to.
Dr. Ruffin, so we can actually post your website, ruffenneurolab.com.
Yeah, sure.
And so if parents have students, I'm hearing the high school or college level, that perhaps they can network with you as far as you providing additional guidance and direction for them to get into a higher level of STEM learning. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Also, if I can find money. So parents, there are loans you can take out, but there are also grants. And the grants you don't have to pay back. And so we want to empower parents by making sure that their children become financially stable.
Okay.
I know when my daughter graduated, I was like, woo.
Yes, I understand. I can certainly empathize and relate to what you're saying, definitely. Okay, so we have about 4 minutes that I would like you to expound upon some of the takeaways. One of the things I heard you say is that if you want to protect your brain cells, start with a good diet. The
Yes.
nutrition would actually help take care of these brain cells. That's what you want to expound upon that and give us some more takeaways.
Yeah. So
Oh, okay. We have 10 minutes. Okay, great.
so
Thank you so much.
yeah, you can. I'm sharing this website for the Hartford Friendship Kids Camp because the session will be starting soon. But
June 28th.
yeah. So the takeaway is yes, you need to start off not just for your child, but for your own health with a healthy diet. You want to avoid processed food, synthetic foods. You want to eat things that are going to give the cell what it needs in order to function. And so if you look
Dr.
at the
Buffett,
label,
those are convenient. So for me to stop at McDonald's on the way home or give my
yes, it
child
is.
chips for a snack. I mean, it's so convenient though.
So I have a question. How much do one of those meals cost if you buy a number one? Well, that same amount, you can go to the grocery store and buy a steak. That's what I've been doing. And I've been grilling out. And so I've spent fast food wise, because it's convenient, $60+ to feed 3 people. When you can spend that much money and have food for several days, and the food is actually better. And you don't want to just make sure you get, the meats and everything like that, but you want to eat the vegetables, because the green leafy vegetables are going to give you the essential minerals that you need, essential vitamins that you need in order for your cell to function properly. A lot of people take supplements and everything like that, but nature gives you what you need, and you just have to eat properly. Avoid GMOs and that type of thing, genetically modified foods.
Okay, so starting with a healthy nutritional diet for me as a parent, for parents and their children. That's what I'm hearing. What are the takeaways from this topic that is so deep? I mean, it's so valuable. What are the takeaways should we be sharing with parents?
So I think not only should you be worrying about what you're putting inside of your body, but also the environment that your body is in. And so if you know that there is a stressful environment, avoid the stressful environment. If you know there are things that give you stress, or people that you talk to that pass their stress along, it's your choice, but recognize that that's where the stress is coming from. Right?
All right, so I have to stop you there. So I can hear parents say, you're telling me to avoid stressful environments. I live here because this is all I can afford. I make minimum wage or very close to minimum wage, so I can't afford to move anywhere else. What do you say to them?
So I'm not necessarily telling them to move. What I noticed is that when I'm inside, I could be anywhere.
Okay.
The inside of my house is the place that gives me comfort. And I hopefully can at least control the inside of my house. If it's even just one room, you need a safe space, a space where you aren't concerned with other things and you just allow yourself to diffuse. As a parent, because you're going to pass that energy along, and your child is constantly learning from you, whether or not you see it. And so you are their first teacher. And you want to make sure that the things that you value, you pass along. And the things that you don't understand, or your child doesn't understand, you work through those things together. And if you don't have a resource, I just told you one. So that's exactly why I'm here. But the condition is that the student recognizes, I ask my students 2 things. What are you here for? And why are you here? Because they can't lose the personal connection to the chase, for academic freedom.
All right, so parents, I'm hearing that even if you cannot control the external environment where you live, inside your house should be a safe space for you and your children. So please, parents, be intentional. Plan that safe space for you and your children. What's another takeaway, Dr. Ruffin?
I think another takeaway is, you may feel a certain way about a subject like math, but that energy, you don't want to pass that along. So if it's something that a child needs to deal with or a student needs to deal with, be courageous enough to work through that situation with the child. If not, say that you don't know. And like I said, don't underutilize your resources.
So don't take, what I'm hearing is that don't pass along or pass on your fears, pass on your anxieties, math anxieties or other kind of anxieties to your children. Okay.
Yeah, you want to build them up.
Okay. Anything else?
And I think biggest is just communication. As your child grows, this is the stage I'm at right now, and as your child grows up and they take all of these jewels and things that you've given to them and become their own person, they will leave. And you want to make sure that the communication is still open, that you are able to still know about what's going on, because that's all we have. I mean, at the cellular level, that's all we have. And as we get bigger and bigger, that's all we have, just communication.
So if I'm communicating in a positive, affirming way, keeping the communication lines open with my child, my children, what is that doing on a cellular level?
So similarly to chronic stress, it's restructuring. It's putting the cell in an environment where the cell does not feel like it's too far away from the homeostasis that it seeks. As you move further and further away from that balance that the cell sets, just think if you're in your house and your thermostat breaks and it's summertime, like now,
yes,
and you want it to be 70 degrees, but it's approaching 100, you're going to be irritable.
Yes.
Might not, you're going to be doing all types of things to help yourself not recognize that you're dealing with some type of stress. And so similarly, the cell does things to try to compensate. And if it can't, it kills itself. So
therefore, that helps my children, parents, our children, keep this balance, this emotional, the cellular balance and feeling of well-being, safe, protected, and well-being. Dr. Ruffin, this has just been an awesome, awesome topic. I have learned so much within these last 55 minutes that I cannot believe it. And parents, I'm hoping that you will share this with your friends, your family, your neighbors. This is such a critical topic that we need to be discussing even more among ourselves. How do we create that safe space? How do we intentionally not pass on our fears and anxieties to the next generation? How do we communicate so that we create that homeostasis, that balance within our children? This is and staying away from the toxic stress, being intentional with that. Dr. Ruffin, I really appreciate you so much for sharing your knowledge and also sharing your willingness to help parents get their children on the STEM pathway. This is such a great area, career area to embark upon. We are out of time. This is the last in a series before we break for the summer. So we're going to break for the summer. We'll come back in September. If you've missed the full series, I encourage you to go to hopesdatv.org and you can see all of the series. And if there's something that you would like us to discuss as we come back in the fall, just please send me an email at VickiGallen-Clark@gmail.com, VickiGallen-Clark@gmail.com, and we'll ensure that we get that topic on the schedule. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruffin, for this wealth of information. This has been very, very excellent as far as a topic for our community. I want to thank Dr. Stephen Williams for being our technical support behind the scenes. And then most importantly, parents, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Make sure you share with those that you love. Thank you, Dr. Ruffin, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you both.
Awesome, folks. You've been watching Parents Supporting Parent. We appreciate Vicki Gatlin Clark and Dr. Ruffin. Surely that was a fascinating discussion, and I hope you were as blessed and informed as I was. We look forward to seeing you, in September. God bless you all.